Do we live in a patriarchy?
No. Do we live in a society that is based on persistent gender equality in interpersonal relationships, in institutional arrangements? Yes. If you want to call that patriarchy, you can call it patriarchy. I call it gender inequality.
Okay. And do we live in a rape culture?
Again, by rape culture, when they go out at night, do you know any women who don't say, well, geez, I'm parked in a kind of remote parking lot, it's a little late, or, gee, it's getting kind of late, should I work should I stay in the library any longer? Maybe I should go back to my room, maybe I should go back home. I don't know about, going out by myself late at night down in this neighborhood. You know any women who don't think about that? Okay, so we live in a rape culture. We live in a culture in which rape is on people's minds, on women's minds. If 51% of the percent who love them and care about them, who are married to them, who love, all, can't, don't think about this a lot, absolutely not. Does this mean, in fact, what are we talking about? We're talking about like 4 or 5% of men, maybe at most. Most men don't rape. The overwhelming majority don't rape. So if you're saying, is rape normative? Is it like a rite of passage? Of course not. Am I saying that, that all heterosexual sex is really rape? No, of course not. But am I saying that everyone has to deal with this? Everyone has to contend with this? Everyone ought to think about this? That we ourselves or the women that we love have to think about these sorts of things? To me, that's morally unconscionable. It's unconscionable that people I care about have to think about the violence. But it's a culture in which every woman I know, and that includes my mother and my wife and my students and that happen.
All right.
I've known about the men's rights movement for more than 30 years. I think that at their origins, they came out of the same that someone like Warren Farrell was the president on the board of New York Now for a couple of times. Doesn't surprise me at all. We come from the same origin. We moved in completely different directions.
Why do you think feminism has had so much success while the men's movement has a pretty bad rap?
A movement of the subordinate always makes a kind of moral claim on the culture, because we do fairness and justice. So when we hear that injustices are done to people simply because of their race or their gender or their sexuality, I think it's a good thing, would be morally offended if they felt that this was actually really a movement of the superordinate is a little bit difficult. It's a little bit different. And I would pose rhetorically is the men's rights movement really the gender version of the white nationalist movement? Because there are plenty of white people who say that they are the victims of reverse discrimination, right? And their evidence is there's a black man in the White House. Of course it's not going to have very much traction. You can't really organize the people who are superordinate. Because it's hard for them to because the political organizing comes from a feeling of victimization, which is why the men's rights movement makes that claim. Because, you look around and it's hard to see it.
And as perpetrators.
Well, see, this is the part that I don't agree with. I think that the feminist movement is based on the idea that women have been is about systemic inequality. It's not about blaming men. Once you know about this, once you see the discrimination, once your child comes to you and says this, when she was in college or in high school, once your partner says, well, I was actually assaulted at a party, when I was in college, well then you kind of face an existential choice. Now you can't ignore it anymore. That's wrong, right? I don't want that to happen to somebody else. And so it seems to me that the idea that we have this Mars, Venus, women victims, men bad perpetrators. I don't know any feminist women who think that. I think that's a myth. I mean, most of the feminist women I know would love men so much that they say, we need you to be around the kids more. We need you to be home more. We need you to be our allies and our partners. You know, we want you to, you know, we want to have good conversations with you. We want to be as smart as you. We want to be as interesting as you because we want to have really good conversations with you. We're absolutely convinced that you don't want to be around an airhead. I think, prove them right.
Just going to get a little off track here for a second, but I want to get your advice on this. So, you know, I've been a feminist for, I don't know, at least a decade, my adult life. So, but when I started researching the men's rights movement, started talking to MRAs, and they say that feminists attack men essentially, and just in the language, and make men to be the perpetrators. And but when I started reading the MRA's books, The Myth of Male Power, I couldn't help but get angry reading it because it sounded like they were attacking women. And it sounded like they were placing all the blame on women, where the husbands are being abused and they're a slave to work while their woman gets to stay home and have freedom. I couldn't help but feel attacked and be on the defensive. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm trying to look at these gender politics. I try to look at it through an MRA's lens. Mm-hmm. And when I read your book, Angry White Men, I was thinking, okay, if this is angry white women with that, what are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. You know, I think that there is. There are a lot of women who have written books, feminist books, that have expressed their outrage at inequality. The men's rights books strike me as not outraged about inequality, but actually angry at women, personally or something. And it seems to me illogical. And there's two things that strike me as somewhat contradictory. Here's the first. You'll hear on some men's rights websites that the men are working their butts off. They're to support a family, to be sitting home, eating bonbons, being gold diggers, etc. They won't hang out with working class guys. They're always looking for rich guys, whatever. And you'll hear that. And that strikes me as a very 50s kind of argument. That women are gold diggers, they're only after you for your money, they want, the commitment, they want to be taken care of, all of this sort of stuff. And then you get the other thing, which you just also said that the men's rights movement says, which is women are now equal. They can be anything they want. They can go to, and that's great, they'll say. Heart surgeons who are taking away men's jobs, or are they gold diggers? Right? You can't quite have it both ways. There's another thing that strikes me as contradictory in the heart of the men's rights argument. Let's grant every single empirical case as being true. Yes, it is true. Let's just say, it is not true, but let's just assume that there is gender symmetry in domestic violence, that women hit men as much as men hit women. Are you then saying that if I were to say that, I would say, and therefore we need boatloads more funding for domestic violence to develop shelters and adequate interventions because there's this hidden epidemic of men who are being beaten up by women. Or women are all lying. Well, it seems to me that if you really believe in gender symmetry, it's not that you want to, you're not questioning the number of women. You're just saying the number of men is high. You would want to join with women who are anti-violence to say, we have a real problem here. It's not even a gender problem. It's a problem of women hitting men and men hitting women. We've got to get boatloads more funding. Let's work together. That seems the logical response to this. But instead they're saying it's like a zero-sum game. If we fund the women, then we're going to ignore the men. Well, we're not going to ignore the women because we all agree that the levels are as high as we say. It's about, are there men who get beat up by women? Of course there are. Are there children who get beat up by their moms? Of course there are. And we should be concerned about that. And we should look around the political landscape and say, who's addressing these issues?
Yeah. That's all I can say, yeah. I mean,
There's a word we haven't used yet. And there's a word that Warren uses occasionally that I think is really important. In fact, it's the word power. Now, Warren would say that men's power is a myth, or male power is a myth, because men don't feel powerful. He says an asshole who treats you terribly, to come home to kids who don't like you and don't understand you, and and have their headphones on all the time, and a wife who basically is spending all your money. That's not power. He's right. Okay, but here's the thing that I think is really, really important to understand about the men's rights groups. One thing about them, and then about their reversals, and one thing in more general terms. So there are some wrinkles in our system in which men do get short shrift, right? You'll probably want to talk about them. There's problems, for example, with custody, child custody, and divorce courts, and many of the father rights groups really do have some really good, I think, important things to say that we need to pay attention to. There are also places that have been remedied, like the all-male draft. Well, women said, well, we don't like that either. We want to be in the army. And we turned around and said, oh, no, you can't do that. But we're discriminated against, right? Again, a lot of reversals. But so let me talk about a couple of them that I think are important. Feminism as a system, feminism as an ideology, basically said two things. It said women as a group are not in power, right? And this you could measure as a group. You could measure this by looking at the boards of every corporation, university, religious organization, whatever. And you would agree that women were not in power. The second thing that feminists said was individual women don't feel powerful, right? They don't feel like they are able to do all the things that they want to do in their lives because they're held back by these archaic ideas or by these institutional arrangements. So they want more equality. They want to feel more personally powerful. So feminism had a nice symmetry. Women as a group weren't in power. Women individually didn't feel powerful. So now you apply this to men. Men as a group are in power. Of course, obvious. Look at every one of those boards and corporations and universities or whatever, and you'll see men are in power. And then you say, men must therefore feel, and therefore most men feel powerful. We'll look at you like, what are you talking about? I have no power. My wife bosses me around, my boss bosses me around, my kids boss me around. I'm completely powerless. So feminism offers the contradiction for men, and this may explain why it's hard to get traction. To individual men feeling powerful. This is really important because most men don't speak from a position of feeling powerful. They speak from a position of feeling powerless. And that feeling of powerlessness is real, and I think we have to pay attention to it. But I don't think it's true in the sense that so the men's rights groups seem to say, you know how you don't feel powerful? You're right. The women have all the power. Let's go get it back. That's where it feels to me like they lose most. They don't blame feminism for it. And they don't blame gender equality for it. They are right. I think they deliver their mail to the wrong address.